The wind howls off the Atlantic, driving frozen rain against the courthouse windows in Boston. Inside, the air is thick with legal menace. On a freezing sidewalk, a 5-year-old boy, Leo Sterling, blind and impossibly small, kneels, his feet bare and purple, his breath catching the Arctic air. He clutches a broken white cane like a sword without a blade. A voice choked with the cold whispers, "Are you the shield that my mom promised would come?" In that very moment, a former detective, Elias Vance, a man hardened by failure, kneels beside him. What he finds next will launch a war against a cruel guardian and a broken legal system. He'll risk his career, his freedom, and his last shred of hope to protect this boy. But when he meets Maverick, the massive German Shepherd canine haunted by his own broken mission, Elias realizes this is no coincidence. This is a final, brutal chance at redemption. Will a scarred cop and a traumatized dog be enough to save a boy already forgotten by the world? Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. The city of Boston was swallowed by a storm that night, not the gentle dusting that made Beacon Hill picturesque, but a brutal, relentless assault of snow and wind whipping off the Atlantic. The temperature had plunged deep below freezing, coating the brick sidewalks and wrought iron fences in a sheen of dangerous, unforgiving ice. The air was a razor, biting into any exposed skin, forcing the few people foolish enough to be outside to move with hunched, hurried urgency. It was a night for staying indoors, wrapped in the deceptive warmth of central heating and holiday cheer, yet it was precisely this oppressive solitude that Detective Elias Eli Vance sought. He navigated the near-empty streets in his unmarked sedan, the silence inside the car broken only by the rhythmic scrape of the wipers struggling against the onslaught. Eli was 36, though the fatigue etched around his heavy-lidded, gray-blue eyes, and the deeply etched lines from his nose to the corners of his mouth made him look closer to 40. His physical presence was one of stoic geometry, tall, powerfully built beneath a worn dark brown leather jacket, dark jeans, and heavy, mud-caked work boots. His hair, a utilitarian dark brown, was cut short, contrasting sharply with the thick, neatly trimmed stubble that outlined a strong jaw. He wasn't on duty. Officially, he was on administrative leave, a technicality that followed a high-profile case collapsing and leaving him with the gnawing certainty of failure. The incident had hardened him further, building a permafrost of solitude around a naturally determined, almost stubborn personality. Tonight, he was merely driving, an exercise in trying to outrun the echoes in his own mind, the ones that whispered of what he hadn't been able to save. He turned onto Pinckney Street, where the federal-style townhouses stood like unyielding sentinels of old money, their windows glowing with the soft, inviting warmth of Christmas lights. The sight did nothing to ease his tension. He slowed, preparing to turn back toward the anonymity of the highway, when a flicker of unnatural color broke the monochrome landscape of snow and brick. Just beyond the protective gate of a towering, empty-looking mansion, a figure was crouched, a small, unnatural splash of worn emerald green against the pristine white. Eli hit the brakes, his heart immediately shifting from dull rhythm to urgent drum. He didn't consider calling it in. The gut instinct, the primal pull of an alarm bell only a cop truly recognizes, demanded immediate physical action. He threw the car into park and was out the door before the engine stopped whining, the Arctic air hitting his face with a palpable shock. He moved quickly, his boots crushing the ice-crusted snow. The figure was a child, terrifyingly small and still. As he drew closer, the details solidified into a portrait of absolute vulnerability. The child, a boy who couldn't be more than 5, was huddled directly against the freezing wrought iron fence. He was impossibly thin, encased in an old dirt-stained green puffer jacket and worn ripped jeans, offering pitiful protection against the storm. The hood was pulled up, obscuring most of his face, but what was horrifyingly visible were his feet, bare, violet-tinged, and resting directly on the frozen cobblestones. In his stiff, small hand, he clutched a broken white cane, snapped halfway down its length, resting uselessly in the snow beside him. Leo Sterling, the boy whose name Eli would learn later, was the very definition of fragile, possessing the kind of delicate structure reminiscent of spun glass. Eli knelt instantly, ignoring the wet cold seeping into his trousers. He kept his voice low, measured, the practiced tone of de-escalation he used on the street now deployed to calm a terrified child. "Hey, buddy," he said, reaching out a heavily gloved hand, but stopping short of touching him. "It's okay. I'm an officer, a detective. What are you doing out here? Are you lost?" The boy didn't flinch, didn't turn his head, his face remaining tilted slightly upward, towards the wind, as if listening to something far away. Leo's hair, black and tightly curled, was dusted with snow, and when he slowly lowered his chin, Eli could see his pale, chapped lips move. His small hands, raw and bloodless from the cold, were rigid. I can't feel my feet," the boy whispered, the sound thin and near silent against the howl of the wind. She said I had to stand here until I could see the light again." Eli felt a cold, white-hot rush of fury. He gently placed his hand on the boy's rigid shoulder, finally making contact. "We're going to get you warm, Leo. We're going inside, right now." He began to lift the boy, whose body felt weightless and terrifyingly cold, even through the thin fabric of his coat. Just as Eli began to scoop him up, Leo's eyes, dull and unfocused, turned slightly toward the sound of Eli's voice. His lips parted, drawing a shallow, ragged breath. He was so deeply blind that his eyes possessed the unsettling, empty clarity of marble. In a voice that was barely a ghost of a sound, the 5-year-old posed the question that tore through Eli's self-imposed emotional shield like a bullet. "Sir, are you the shield that my mom promised would come?" The question hit Eli with the force of a physical blow. The shield. It was police vernacular, a concept he'd lived by until he had failed to uphold it during his last case, the one that cost him his standing and his peace. Before Eli could process the words, before he could offer any reassurance, the small, frail body went limp in his arms. Leo had passed out, his head lolling gently against Eli's chest, the broken white cane slipping unnoticed into the deep snow. The sight of Leo's utter exhaustion and the horrific realization of his neglect galvanized Eli. The cold, logical part of his cop brain instantly cataloged the situation. Severe hypothermia, likely starvation, definite signs of abuse or extreme negligence. There would be no time for official procedures, no time for waiting for an ambulance that would get delayed in the blizzard. Eli scrambled to his feet, holding Leo tight against the warmth of his own body. He rushed back to the car, wrestling open the passenger door and gently laying the boy across the seat. He cranked the heat to its maximum setting, the vents immediately roaring with scorching air, but the feeling of Leo's icy skin was still horrifyingly present. The drive to the nearest major trauma center, Massachusetts General Hospital, MGH, was a blur of adrenaline and fear, Eli ignoring every traffic rule, his eyes flickering between the snowy road and the small, still form beside him. Upon arrival, he burst into the emergency department, shouting for help. The sight of a massive, heavily built man covered in snow, carrying a nearly lifeless child, stopping all movement in the triage area. Within seconds, Leo was whisked away. Eli was left in the sterile, brightly lit waiting area, shedding his snow-drenched leather jacket and feeling the familiar, unwelcome burn of protective fury rising in his gut. A few minutes later, a doctor approached him, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and compassionate eyes. Dr. Juliana Rossi, mid-30s, wearing navy blue scrubs and a focus that spoke of long, draining shifts. "Detective Vance?" she asked, consulting his hastily scrawled contact information. "The boy is stable, but barely. Severe hypothermia, 3rd-degree frostbite on his feet, and acute malnutrition. The abuse, it's not new. We've found evidence of prior fractures and significant contusions. Child Protective Services will be notified immediately." Eli stood tall, bracing himself against the news he already knew. "I understand, doctor," he said, his voice dropping back to the hard, unyielding tone of a professional. He looked at the white tile floor, then back at the doctor. "I found him quivering in the snow. His legal guardian is a woman named Carla Jensen, South End Apartment." He hesitated, his jaw flexing. "I won't let him go back there, doctor. Not while I'm still breathing. That child asked me if I was the shield, and tonight I'm going to make sure that means something." He pulled out his phone, already dialing his former general counsel's number, his eyes fixed on the door behind which Leo lay. He might have failed to protect others in the past, but tonight, on a freezing Christmas Eve in Boston, Elias Vance swore a silent, unbreakable oath to a 5-year-old blind boy he had just met. "You are safe now, and I will be your shield." The sterile white noise of the hospital waiting room was a poor substitute for silence, but it was where Detective Elias Vance made his stand. The fury that had ignited in the snow still burned, banked now by the urgent need for action. He sat in a corner, his broad shoulders filling the rigid plastic chair, the brown leather of his jacket smelling faintly of snow and damp wood. He had spent the first 2 hours on his phone, not as a cop, but as a man preparing for war. He contacted Marcia Dawes, his former legal counsel at the precinct, a sharp, tireless woman in her late 40s, whose dedication was as uncompromising as her power suits. She had agreed to represent him pro bono in the emergency custody hearing, recognizing the stark moral clarity of the situation. Elias knew the system's limits. A child was an asset to be managed, not a life to be saved, unless someone with leverage stepped in. He had leverage, his reputation, however tarnished, and his network. His purpose, for the first time in months, was razor sharp, displacing the aimless grief that had plagued him since his suspension. Around 4 a.m., the social worker, Ms. Evelyn Reed, a woman of about 50 with tired eyes and a uniform of sensible but unremarkable business attire, approached him. Her demeanor was cautious, professional, worn down by years of seeing the worst of humanity. "Detective Vance," she began, clipboard held tight against her chest, "we have the preliminary report. The child, Leo Sterling, is stable but severely underweight and malnourished. The medical team is concerned about the long-term effects of the cold. The injuries are consistent with neglect." She paused, her eyes meeting his. "We have an address for the legal guardian, Carla Jensen, in the South End. Per procedure, we need to visit the residence and contact the guardian. If you could provide any additional information on the guardian's character or history, it would be beneficial." Elias stood up, the movement abrupt and commanding. He was taller than Ms. Reed, his expression unreadable, and he towered over her in a way that commanded attention without aggression. The guardian, Ms. Reed, abandoned a blind 5-year-old child, barefoot, in a blizzard on Christmas Eve. That's all the character information you need. I'll drive you there, now. His tone was not a request, but a statement of unalterable intent. Ms. Reed, recognizing the steely resolve of a man who would not be denied, simply nodded, adjusting her grip on the clipboard. The drive across Boston was silent, the city waking up under a shroud of heavy, fresh snow. The transition from the historic, affluent cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill to the grim, practical brick avenues of the South End was stark. The air here was heavier, thick with the scent of stale cooking grease and poverty, a tangible contrast to the crisp, clean cold of the suburbs. Carla Jensen's address led them to a dilapidated tenement building, its windows dark, and few signs of life stirring. The hallways were narrow, the carpet threadbare and sticky, and the walls bore scars of years of neglect and loud arguments. Elias, followed closely by the hesitant Ms. Reed, located Unit 3C. He didn't bother with a gentle knock. He rapped on the door with the heel of his hand, a loud, official, demanding sound. The door was pulled open a crack, revealing Carla Jensen. She was a woman in her mid-40s, her face slack and prematurely aged, framed by cheap, straw-like blonde hair that was querulously pulled back. She wore a stained, oversized sweatshirt and sweatpants, reeking faintly of old cigarettes and cheap liquor. Her eyes, small and perpetually shifting, were the first thing Eli noticed. They held no concern, only a calculating wariness that instantly set his teeth on edge. "Who the hell is knocking at this hour?" she slurred, pulling the door wider and immediately lighting a new cigarette from the butt of the one she had just finished. Her voice was raspy, edged with chronic frustration. "Ms. Jensen, I am Ms. Reed from Child Protective Services, and this is Detective Vance. We are here regarding your nephew, Leo Sterling." Carla's expression instantly switched from annoyance to a practiced, watery-eyed surprise. "Leo? Oh, that sweet boy. Did he wander off again? He's such a handful, bless his heart. Sensitive, you know. He's always exaggerating." Her performance was transparent, offensive in its laziness. She tried to block the door, but Eli, without touching her, subtly planted his large booted foot in the door jamb, preventing her from closing it. "He was found in sub-zero temperatures, Ms. Jensen, barefoot. He is currently hospitalized with severe hypothermia," Eli stated, his voice flat and dangerously controlled. Carla flinched, not out of shock, but resentment. Oh, that. It was just a time out. He was being dramatic, spilled my coffee. You try raising a blind kid, detective. He's always breaking things, costs me a fortune in equipment. You have no idea what it's like. She stepped aside grudgingly, allowing Ms. Reed and Eli to enter the cramped, airless apartment. The interior was a mess of epic proportions. Dirty clothes were strewn over every surface, old takeout containers molded on a counter covered in sticky grime. The air conditioning unit was running despite the freezing outdoor temperature, and the single radiator in the corner was cold to the touch. In the corner of the small, dimly lit living room lay what looked like Leo's designated space. A thin, stained mattress on the floor, covered by a threadbare blanket. There was no pillow, no toy, nothing that suggested comfort or care. Next to the mattress, a cheap plastic bowl, likely meant for a pet, sat upside down, empty. Eli's eyes swept the room, noting the details with the precision of a detective building a case. The overflowing ashtray, the cheap lottery tickets scattered on a makeshift table, the utter absence of heating. Near the child's sleeping area. "Is this where he slept, Ms. Jensen?" Eli asked, gesturing to the mattress with a gloved hand. Carla shrugged, drawing deeply on her cigarette. "Sure. He's blind, he doesn't need much. And it's not like I'm a millionaire, I do my best." Elias looked at the empty pet bowl and then at the frozen radiator. He looked at the chaos, the neglect, and the callous indifference of the woman standing before him. He felt the cold, hard certainty of his conviction settle in his bones. This was not a temporary lapse. This was systemic, long-term abandonment fueled by greed and addiction. He knew, instinctively, that sending Leo back here was a death sentence, whether slow or fast. Turning to Ms. Reed, who looked visibly ill, he said, "Ms. Reed, I believe the conditions here constitute an immediate, demonstrable danger to the child's well-being. This environment is physically and psychologically hostile." He then looked directly at Carla, his eyes steel. "We will be proceeding with an emergency guardianship petition. You will be hearing from my lawyer." Carla's mask of feigned victimhood shattered. "Guardianship? You can't! I'm his blood. The state pays me to keep him. You can't just walk in here, you fancy cop." Eli stepped toward the door, his form blocking the light from the hallway. "Watch me," he said, his voice a low, terrifying growl that carried all the menace of his former job. "He asked for the shield, and you just met him." He slammed the door behind them, the sound echoing through the cheap building like a gunshot. Outside, he didn't head for the car immediately. He pulled out his phone, calling Marcia Dawes. "Marcia," he said, the words clipped and urgent. "Forget the temporary hearing. We need a full, permanent custody transfer and get an emergency protective order against Carla Jensen now." The cold air of the South End suddenly felt irrelevant compared to the heat of the battle he was preparing to wage. He was back in the fight, not for the badge, but for the boy. Elias returned to the hospital, his mind a cold calculator working through legal strategy, but the moment he saw Leo's tiny frame sleeping under a mound of blankets, the legal armor cracked. He secured Leo's release only after guaranteeing Dr. Rossi, the kind but pragmatic physician, daily verbal check-ins, and a promise of a dedicated caregiver. It was 10 a.m. on Christmas Day, a fact that pressed the urgency of the situation into sharp relief. No child should be alone on this day, let alone one recovering from near-fatal neglect. He dressed Leo in a set of donated sweatpants and a thick, soft sweater, replacing the stained green puffer jacket, before carrying the feather-light boy out to the sedan. Leo was quiet, clutching a worn, plush elephant toy that Eli had recovered from the hospital's lost and found. Eli's apartment, located in a solid, unpretentious brick building in South Boston, was not designed for domesticity. It was a bachelor's sanctuary of function over warmth, dark wood, leather furniture, and a kitchen that saw more takeout menus than actual cooking. The blinds were usually drawn, maintaining a perpetual state of muted gloom that suited Eli's solitary temperament. When he carried Leo through the door, the apartment felt immediately wrong, too silent, too hard-edged for a 5-year-old. He set Leo gently down on the overstuffed leather sofa, the boy's feet, now bandaged, protruding awkwardly. "This is home for now, buddy," Eli said, stripping off his leather jacket and tossing it onto a dining chair, "just until we get the paperwork sorted." The following 48 hours were a relentless exercise in disruption. Elias Vance, the detective who dealt in concrete facts and sudden violence, found himself navigating the bewildering logistics of a child's life, finding appropriate food, locating Braille toys online, and, most pressingly, attempting to child-proof his apartment. He stubbed his toe twice on the low coffee table, which he quickly moved to the storage unit, creating an immediate and necessary change in his familiar environment. He realized his life had been one of simple, self-contained movements, and Leo's presence was a seismic shift. Leo, meanwhile, moved with the hyper-awareness of the sightless, mapping the room not with his eyes, but with the quiet tap of his borrowed full-sized cane and the subtle variation in sound echo. He was polite, almost frighteningly so, always asking permission before moving or speaking. One evening, as Eli sat reading legal documents at the kitchen table, Leo shuffled over, guided by the sound of Eli's breathing, and stood beside him. Leo reached out his small, tentative hand, his fingers finding the sharp angle of Eli's jawline, tracing the outline of his neatly trimmed stubble. His touch was light, almost like a consultation. Eli froze, uncomfortable with the intimacy, yet unable to pull away. Leo's fingers traveled up to the deep, horizontal furrow between Eli's eyebrows. "You have sad lines here," Leo whispered, his voice thin but certain. "It sounds like you miss someone very much. Your voice is cold, but your hands are hot." The observation was too raw, too truthful to be deflected. Eli had lived in the emotional equivalent of a blackout since his suspension, burying the guilt and the memory of the case that had gone sideways. The case where a young informant, a father, was murdered because Eli had trusted the wrong man on the inside. Leo, the boy who couldn't see, saw more clearly than anyone else had in years. "Yeah, I guess I do, buddy," Eli managed, his throat tight. He pushed back the uncomfortable realization that he hadn't just rescued Leo. Leo was beginning to rescue him from the prison of his own bitterness. The next logistical obstacle was companionship. Eli was back in court and meeting with Marcia Dawes for hours at a time, and Leo couldn't simply be left alone. Eli needed a guide, a constant, non-human presence. His thoughts turned to his old connections at the Boston Police Canine Training Center. He contacted Sergeant Marcus Mack Riley, the training supervisor, a man in his late 50s with a face like worn leather and a slow, deliberate handshake that conveyed more respect than words. Mack, a towering man with a faded military buzz cut and a perpetually gruff voice that masked a soft heart, had been Eli's field training officer years ago and knew his character implicitly. Eli explained Leo's situation. Mack listened in silence, occasionally nodding, until Eli mentioned the need for a service animal. "I have just the dog, Eli," Mack finally rumbled, his voice gravelly, "but he's not an easy case." The following afternoon, Eli took Leo to the Canine Center, a sprawling, secure complex located outside the city where the cold concrete runs smelled sharply of ozone and disciplined canine energy. Mack met them, wearing heavy-duty tactical pants and a thick hooded sweatshirt over his uniform shirt. "He's an 8-year-old German Shepherd, decommissioned early," Mack explained quietly to Eli, as Leo waited patiently near the entrance, holding Eli's hand. "His name is Maverick. He was a phenomenal tracking and apprehension dog. But during our last operation, he sustained severe psychological trauma, lost his handler in a high-intensity situation. Now, he's reactive, distrustful, and essentially retired to our back kennels. He won't let anyone but me near him. He's a broken shield, Eli." Eli nodded, understanding brokenness all too well. Mack led them to a secluded outdoor training run. Maverick was immense, a magnificent German Shepherd with a sleek, powerful black and tan coat, his muscles visible even beneath the winter bulk. His appearance was imposing, a true warrior, but his posture betrayed his inner state. He was pacing near the back fence, head lowered, tail tucked, his eyes, deep, intelligent amber, darting nervously. When Maverick saw Mack, he stopped, giving a low, warning growl aimed at Eli, the stranger. "Go slow, Leo," Eli instructed, kneeling beside the boy, removing his own glove. "He's a very good dog, but he's scared, just like we were." Leo nodded, clutching his elephant toy. He slowly extended his hands, the small, thin fingers moving delicately in the cold air, completely without visual reference. The lack of eye contact, the total absence of visual threat perception, seemed to confuse Maverick. The dog stopped growling, tilting his head. He watched, or sensed, the boy's blind, innocent approach, a contrast to the aggressive, direct eye contact he usually associated with danger. Leo's fingers finally brushed against Maverick's massive chest. Instead of snapping or recoiling, the powerful German Shepherd instantly lowered his entire body to the snow-dusted ground, his posture becoming submissive. Leo then gently found the dog's gorge fur-covered head and stroked him, his touch feather-light. "Hello, Maverick," Leo whispered, his voice gaining a soft, soothing quality that Eli had never heard before. "You're cold too, but you sound strong." The adoption of Maverick was not the smooth, bureaucratic transfer Eli had envisioned. It was an intense process driven by Mac Riley's personal authority and Eli's own legal leverage. The paperwork was finalized quickly, but the challenge of integrating a highly trained, psychologically scarred canine into a cramped South Boston apartment with a blind 5-year-old was a monumental undertaking. The German Shepherd, a formidable presence even in repose, took up significant space in Eli's already Spartan apartment. Maverick was magnificent, 8 years old, his black and tan coat glossy and thick, his muscles coiled beneath the fur like steel springs. He moved with a low, silent intensity, his intelligence evident in the careful way his amber eyes, now less darting, more focused, assessed his new environment. Maverick still wore his emotional damage like an invisible harness. He flinched at loud, sudden noises, the screech of a bus braking outside, the unexpected slam of a door, reacting with a low-throated growl and an immediate assumption of a protective stance. His primary instinct remained apprehension and defense, a programmed response from years on the force, rather than the gentle guidance required of a service dog. Leo, however, was his anchor. The boy, who now moved with a new confidence thanks to his repaired cane, had developed an uncanny, almost telepathic connection with the dog. When Maverick became agitated, Leo would simply sit on the floor, his bandaged feet stretched out, and gently hum, a non-melodic, soothing sound, a quiet, constant frequency that seemed to instantly calm the powerful animal. Maverick would lie down beside him, resting his massive head on Leo's lap, his body a silent, unwavering shield. The initial days were dedicated to routine and de-escalation training. Eli had installed sound-dampening panels in the living room and placed thick, washable rugs over the hardwood floors to help Leo map the space through texture and to absorb sudden noises. He hired Mrs. Elena Costas, a retired elementary school teacher and neighbor from the floor below, as a temporary caregiver. Mrs. Costas, a short, stout Greek woman in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled back tightly and cheeks perpetually flushed from either the cold or the kitchen heat, possessed the kind of no-nonsense warmth that was both comforting and uncompromising. "You are going to court, yes, Abal?" Mrs. Costas asked Eli one morning, her voice firm as she stirred a bowl of oatmeal for Leo. She wore a thick floral apron over a simple dress and comfortable, practical orthopedic shoes. "Good, because this boy, he has suffered. I see it in the way he eats, too fast, like the food will disappear. We fix this, Detective Vance. We put structure back." Mrs. Costas quickly became the apartment's quiet center of gravity, cooking nutritious meals that slowly restored color to Leo's cheeks and enforcing a firm schedule. Her presence, reliable and consistent, allowed Eli to dedicate his time to the legal battle. The legal fight was consuming. Elias and Marcia Dawes, his counsel, were relentless. Marcia filed the emergency protective order, successfully preventing Carla Jensen from contacting Leo or Eli. The evidence of neglect, Dr. Rossi's medical reports, Ms. Reed's testimony about the apartment conditions, and the photographic evidence Eli had taken, painted a grim, irrefutable picture. However, Carla's defense, backed by a cheap, opportunistic lawyer, focused entirely on attacking Eli's character. They cited his recent suspension, hinting at emotional instability and the unconventional, rushed nature of the adoption, trying to portray him as a vigilante cop using the boy as a way to fix his failures. The pressure began to show. Eli was juggling court appearances with the complex needs of the child and the dog. One afternoon, Eli was pacing the living room floor, wrestling with Chief Hayes' latest formal warning. Chief Dennis Hayes was Eli's superior, a man in his early 60s, with the imposing, scorned build of someone who had spent 30 years behind a desk, but still thought like a street cop. His face was a roadmap of stress, his close-cropped, gray hair barely containing the frustration of managing a troubled precinct. He called Eli directly, his voice strained and heavy. "Vance, I admire what you're doing, but you are stretching the rules until they snap," Hayes growled over the phone. "The department can't afford this liability. The media is starting to pick up on the vigilante cop saves blind kid angle, and it is not helping my review board. Jensen's lawyer is making noises about illegal use of police resources. You need to choose, Eli. The badge or the boy. You can't have both while you're under review." The ultimatum was brutal, but Eli barely hesitated. He looked down at Leo, who was sitting quietly on the rug, Braille flashcards spread around him, his small hands diligently tracing the raised dots. Maverick was beside him, his massive head resting on the boy's lap, his eyes closed in deep, trusting slumber. The sight was the answer. Eli took a deep, resolving breath. "Chief," he said, his voice flat with finality, "I know my priorities. I'll hand in my formal resignation and my badge before the next hearing. I'm focusing on the boy. I'll send you the paperwork by the end of the day." The decision was not made lightly. The badge was everything he had built, a legacy he had desperately tried to uphold. But the silence that followed his resignation was not the sound of loss. It was the quiet settling of peace. He felt the heavy weight of the shield, the duty to protect, lifted from his professional shoulders and transferred to his personal heart. Later that evening, after Leo was asleep, Eli sat at the kitchen table, the light casting deep shadows across his face. He began going through his apartment, pulling out old police gear, memorabilia, and anything that tied him tightly to his past life. He needed cash to cover the mounting legal fees. He decided to sell his limited edition watch and a few old valuable pieces of equipment. As he opened a lockbox for the items, his hands brushed against a small, worn photograph, a picture of a young Eli, grinning, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a receiving blanket. It was the child of his informant, the boy who was killed in the failed raid. Eli stared at the photo, the familiar, crushing guilt rising. He saw the face of the dead informant, David Sterling, the father he had failed to protect. He remembered David's frantic last calls, his voice pleading for protection for his family. Eli had been too late for David and his wife, but looking at Leo, who was sleeping peacefully just down the hall, Eli understood. He couldn't save the past, but he could save the one piece of it that remained. He was no longer a cop, but the shield was a code, not a title. The legal siege began with the harsh clang of Eli's apartment door closing behind Marcia Dawes. The lawyer had left, her sharp voice echoing Eli's urgency. They needed unassailable evidence of Carla Jensen's cruelty, and they needed it yesterday. With his resignation paperwork officially submitted to Chief Hayes, Elias Vance, the detective, was dead. In his place stood Elias Vance, the sole advocate. His old life, defined by procedures and protocols, was now irrelevant. His new life, bound by an oath to a blind boy, demanded an approach that was both forensic and fiercely personal. Eli knew the state of Carla's South End apartment was damning, but it only told part of the story. He needed the narrative of the neighbors, the silent witnesses to Leo's prolonged suffering. He left Leo under the watchful, no-nonsense eye of Mrs. Elena Costas, who was already enforcing a strict routine of oatmeal and classical music. Maverick, the German shepherd, remained a silent shadow, lying near the living room doorway, his head up, his senses alert, a perfect, silent guardian. Elias drove back to the South End tenement, the air still biting with cold, but the sun out, revealing the city's grim reality in unforgiving detail. The building looked even more defeated in the daylight. Eli wore civilian clothes, a heavy wool coat over a dark sweater and jeans, his appearance less authoritative, more sympathetic. He didn't want to frighten witnesses. He wanted them to confide in a man, not a badge. He started with the elderly residents, knowing they saw everything. He found Mr. Silvio Moretti, a retired dock worker in his late 70s, sitting on a folding chair inside the dimly lit communal entryway, his cane resting across his lap. Mr. Moretti was short, wizened, and dressed in layers of practical, mismatched clothing, his face a roadmap of hard labor and suspicion. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low, guttural murmur with a thick Italian accent. Eli knelt beside him, eliminating the physical power dynamic. "Mr. Moretti, I'm Elias Vance. I'm looking for information about the little boy from 3C, Leo Sterling, the blind boy." Mr. Moretti's eyes, roomy and dark, darted nervously toward the stairwell before settling on Eli. "The little one. They took him away, the social worker lady." He shook his head slowly. "The Senora Jensen, she is a bad woman. Always yelling, always gone." Eli didn't interrupt, allowing the silence to draw out the truth. "She didn't feed him enough. I would give him my bread sometimes. She would beat him for taking it. But the worst," Mr. Moretti leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The worst was the dog bowl. She made him eat his food, rice, and cheap beans, out of the floor bowl, like a dog. She said he was blind so he wouldn't know the difference." She laughed. A cold spike of pure distilled rage pierced Eli. He clenched his fists inside his coat pockets, forcing his expression to remain calm. "Professional. Did you ever see physical harm, Mr. Moretti? Bruises, always bruises, on his arms, on his legs. Once she pushed him down the stairs, said he wandered. It was 2 months ago. The boy cried for hours." Mr. Moretti's voice broke slightly. "He is a good boy. He deserved better." Eli carefully took down the testimony, offering a simple, heartfelt "thank you" before leaving the building, the old man's words ringing in his ears. He continued his investigation, spending hours walking the block, knocking on doors, and speaking to shop owners. He found a local grocer who reluctantly confirmed that Carla only bought cheap liquor and lottery tickets, never children's food. Most significantly, he found Mr. Wayne Peterson, the building superintendent, a hulking man in his 50s with perpetually greasy coveralls and a deep, cynical distrust of authority. Mr. Peterson, who was scraping ice off a walkway with a rusty shovel, initially refused to talk. "Cops, social workers, you all come, you ask question, and nothing changes. She gets her welfare check, and the kid suffers. Leave me out of it," Mr. Peterson muttered, keeping his head down. Eli leaned on the shovel handle, using his imposing presence not to intimidate, but to connect. "I resigned my commission this morning, Mr. Peterson. I'm not here as a cop. I'm here because I'm fighting to adopt that boy, and I need hard proof of neglect for the court. I need to know about the heat." Peterson stopped shoveling, looking up at Eli, assessing the seriousness behind his eyes. He saw the absence of a badge, the exhaustion, and the genuine plea. "The heat," Peterson finally confirmed, shaking his head. "The old radiator in 3C, near the kid's little bed? It's been busted since October. I told Carla. She said, 'Good, kid needs to toughen up.' I saw her, once, taking the old man's extra blanket off the boy's sleeping bag and throwing it out the window. She was laughing, said the boy was too comfortable." The image, Leo's small, vulnerable body freezing by a broken radiator, Carla stealing his last defense, was the final piece of the evidentiary puzzle. Eli thanked Mr. Peterson and walked back to his car, his leather coat suddenly feeling too heavy, too warm. The cold in Leo's apartment wasn't just physical, it was the chilling cold of absolute human indifference. He drove straight to Marcia Dawes' office in downtown Boston. Marcia, sitting behind a polished mahogany desk, was a woman whose every movement was economical and precise. Eli laid out the collected testimonies, the dog bowl, the constant physical and emotional abuse, the stealing of blankets, the broken heat. Marcia listened, her sharp gaze never leaving his. "This is it, Eli," she concluded, stacking the notes. "This is the documented pattern of cruel and unusual punishment we need. Mr. Moretti and Mr. Peterson are strong, credible, independent witnesses. Carla Jensen is going down." As Eli was leaving the office, he received a text from Mrs. Costas. "Leo is asking for the broken stick." Eli realized Leo meant the broken white cane he had been holding in the snow, the symbol of his former, painful life. He had left the broken cane at the MGH evidence desk. He called the hospital immediately to retrieve it. He needed that cane, not just as evidence, but because it represented the trauma that Eli was now sworn to mend. He had to go back to the hospital, back to the scene of the trauma, to collect the final, material piece of the boy's suffering. The broken white cane felt sickeningly light in Eli's gloved hands. He had retrieved it from the MGH evidence locker. The thin aluminum shaft snapped sharply halfway down, its tip worn and scarred from repeated impact. It was the last physical link to Leo's life of neglect, and as he carried it back to the apartment, the weight of the child's suffering pressed down on him. Leo hadn't asked for it back to use. He asked for it as an artifact, a painful piece of his past Eli was now tasked with mending. Back in his apartment, Eli sat at his now clear dining table. The broken cane spread out before him, beside the old, creased photograph of the infant son of his deceased informant, David Sterling. He began methodically cleaning the cane, preparing it for a repair that would never truly erase the break. As his fingers traced the smooth, once pristine metal, he noticed a tiny, almost invisible etching just above the fracture point. 2 small, faint letters, DS, scratched into the aluminum. David Sterling. A chill, colder than the Boston winter, ran down Eli's spine. David Sterling, the informant whose assassination led to Eli's suspension and inner turmoil, the man Eli had promised to protect and failed. Leo Sterling, the same last name. The blind boy's father and the dead informant. It couldn't be a coincidence. The thought shifted the legal battle from a mission of moral conviction to a profound act of personal penance. He spent the rest of the morning in a frantic, unauthorized investigation, using a secure, decommissioned laptop and credentials he hadn't yet surrendered. He had to know the connection. He bypassed the official police database, instead calling Sergeant Mac Riley, his former FTO, whose loyalty was to Eli's personal code, not the department's bureaucracy. Mac, the gruff, square-shouldered training supervisor, agreed to run a discreet search on the David Sterling case files, focusing on the family history and any related asset protection details, specifically K-9 unit assignments. The legal machinery, meanwhile, was operating at full throttle. Marcia Dawes, Eli's lawyer, was preparing for the temporary custody extension hearing, focusing on a character assassination of Carla Jensen. Eli, as promised, had sold his high-end tactical rifle and specialized surveillance equipment to a discreet, trusted contact in the private security sector, netting enough capital to cover the first months of legal fees and Leo's initial care without draining his savings. He needed to be financially unimpeachable. They're going to try to paint you as an unstable, single-male cop using the child to heal your own wounds, Marcia warned during their late afternoon call. Your testimony needs to be clean, clinical, and centered only on the facts of Carla's neglect. It will be, Eli assured her, his voice tight, but his focus was split. While he rehearsed the testimony of the dog bowl and the frozen radiator, his mind hammered away at the Sterling connection. That evening, the crucial call came from Mac Riley. The sergeant was terse, his voice low and riddled with official caution. Eli, I found something you need to hear, and I'm wiping the logs immediately. David Sterling was your informant. We knew that. But the detail you missed in the primary report, the detail they redacted during the cleanup, was the asset protection file. It was a high-risk protection detail. Eli leaned closer to the phone, his pen hovering uselessly over a legal pad. What was the protection, Mac? The protection wasn't just surveillance. It was K-9 deployment, Mac confirmed, his voice grave. David Sterling's family, his wife and his son, Leo, were under constant specialized K-9 watch, assigned to the task force. The dog's designation code, MVK-8, Maverick's unit identification. The revelation landed with devastating clarity. Eli wasn't just fighting for a boy. He was fighting for the son of the man he had failed, and he had unwittingly adopted the very dog, Maverick, who had been assigned to protect that family. Maverick's psychological trauma wasn't from a random failed raid. It was from the trauma of his handler being killed and the failure of his primary objective, protecting the informant's family from the ambush that ultimately claimed both parents. The German Shepherd hadn't just failed. He had witnessed the exact moment Eli's promise to David Sterling was broken. Eli hung up, the broken cane and the photograph blurring together on the table. The hair on the back of his neck prickled with a cold, terrifying sense of predestination. The universe, or perhaps God, had delivered the consequences of his failure directly to his doorstep. The living son of the dead informant, and the dog that had been his silent guardian. The bond between Leo and Maverick wasn't serendipity. It was the echo of a tragic, failed mission. He looked across the room. Leo was sitting quietly on the floor with Mrs. Costas, listening intently as she taught him how to distinguish between the textures of various winter fruits. Maverick was lying between them, his head resting gently on Leo's thigh. The powerful animal was no longer a traumatized K-9. He was a silent, black and tan monument to a promise that had been violently broken and was now, slowly, being rebuilt. Eli realized the fight in court wasn't just about custody, it was about redemption. He had to win, not only for Leo's safety, but for David Sterling's memory. He was holding on to the last remaining vestiges of the life he had failed to save. This time, the shield would not fail. The day of the hearing arrived with the deceptive beauty of a late Boston winter morning. The air was crisp, the snow clean, the sun blindingly bright, a false tranquility that belied the courthouse's grim purpose. Eli, dressed in a sharp, dark suit that seemed to sharpen the angular set of his jaw and emphasize the intensity in his gray-blue eyes, felt the familiar tension of a high-stakes case, magnified 1,000 times by the stakes, Leo's future and his own redemption. Leo, scrubbed clean and dressed in a new, soft woolen coat, was subdued. He held Eli's hand tight, his movements tentative despite Maverick's grounding presence. The German shepherd, majestic and imposing in his service vest, walked with the trained discipline of a canine, his body language communicating silent, unwavering protection. They were accompanied by Marcia Dawes, the lawyer, a fortress of calm in her charcoal suit, and Mrs. Costas, who, having been subpoenaed, was anxiously clutching a rosary beneath her sensible coat. The courtroom was a cavern of mahogany and outdated technology, dominated by the bench where Judge Eleanor Carras presided. The judge was a woman in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled back into a severe but elegant bun. Her face, though wrinkled by time, held the unwavering gravity of someone who had spent decades discerning truth from deception. Her expression was stern, allowing no hint of personal bias. Yet, Eli sensed a deep, weary commitment to justice in her posture. Carla Jensen sat across the aisle, dressed in cheap, ill-fitting clothes, her blonde hair marginally tidier than when Eli had first seen her. She projected an air of tearful martyrdom, her opportunistic lawyer, a sweating man named Mr. Barry Thompson, working hard to paint Eli as an emotionally unhinged former cop with a hero complex. The proceedings were a tense, methodical dissection of Leo's life. Marcia Dawes led with the medical evidence of neglect, followed by the harrowing testimonies of Dr. Rossi, Mrs. Costas, and the neighbors, Mr. Moretti and Mr. Peterson. The narrative of the dog bowl and the broken radiator slammed into the court with brutal, undeniable force. Mr. Thompson, in his defense, focused his attack entirely on Eli. He spent 40 minutes detailing Eli's professional failure, the disastrous raid, the suspension, the subsequent resignation, claiming Eli was using Leo to compensate for his professional guilt. Thompson concluded, his voice ringing with false righteousness. "Your Honor, this man is unstable, a vigilante, and he has zero blood claim to this child. He is seeking guardianship for his own therapeutic needs, not the boy's." Then it was Eli's turn. He rose, walking to the witness stand without any visible nervousness. His composure was absolute. Marcia guided him through the story of finding Leo, the efforts he had made, the stability he offered. Then she shifted. "Mr. Vance," Marcia asked, "the opposition claims your sudden attachment to Leo is arbitrary. Can you tell the court if you had any prior knowledge of Leo's family before finding him in the snow?" Eli looked directly at Judge Karras, his eyes steady. "Yes, Your Honor. I believe I have a connection to Leo's family, one that is not arbitrary, but defined by a shared tragic history." He then dropped the bombshell, the connection to David Sterling, the informant killed during Eli's botched investigation, a fact that had been officially redacted from the public record. He revealed the DS etched on the broken cane, and, more dramatically, the true origin of Maverick. Eli had to tread carefully, avoiding classified police language, but the implication was clear. "Your Honor," Eli stated, his voice ringing with raw authority, "Maverick, the German shepherd currently standing by Leo's side, was not randomly assigned to me. Maverick was Unit MVK-8, assigned to asset protection for the Sterling family. His psychological trauma stems from his inability to stop the assassination of David and Mrs. Sterling. He failed his mission, just as I failed my informant." A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. Carla Jensen gasped, her face draining of color, as the pieces of the puzzle, the murder of her relatives, the police protection, the money trail, slotted into place, confirming her worst fears about the danger surrounding Leo. "I am not asking for guardianship to heal myself, Your Honor," Eli continued, his voice dropping slightly, becoming intensely personal. "I am asking for guardianship to fulfill a promise I made, a promise David Sterling believed in when he called me the Shield. I failed to protect his family then. I will not fail his son and the dog who tried to save them now." The The gravity of the testimony was immense, suggesting a depth of institutional failure and a level of threat that elevated the case far beyond a simple custody dispute. Finally, it was Leo's turn to speak. He was led to a small chair at the side of the room, Maverick walking with him, positioning himself so the boy's hand was always resting on the service vest. Leo clutched his beloved, worn plush elephant. Judge Karras leaned forward, her steely facade softening. "Leo," the judge asked gently, "do you understand why you are here today?" "Yes, ma'am," Leo whispered, his voice small but firm. "I'm here to tell you I want to stay with Eli." "Why, Leo? Why Eli Vance over your family?" Leo took a slow, deep breath, his small chin held high. He didn't point or gesture. He simply spoke the profound truth that only a child could articulate. "Because Eli is the shield. He doesn't let the cold inside the house, and he bought me Maverick. Maverick is my first shield, and Eli is my second shield. They see me." He paused, tears beginning to track clean paths through the faint dirt on his cheeks. "Even when I can't see them. And when I touch Eli's face, I know the sad lines are getting smaller. We belong together, ma'am. We are mending." Yes, the word. Courtroom was utterly silent. Mr. Thompson, the opposing lawyer, wisely refrained from cross-examination. Carla Jensen, her face now a mask of frantic fear rather than manufactured grief, realized she was completely and utterly exposed. Judge Karras stared at Leo, at Eli standing rigidly behind him, and at Maverick, the silent 8-year-old warrior. She straightened the papers on her desk, her gaze sweeping the room. Her voice, when she spoke, was heavy, concluding the hearing with finality. "In light of the overwhelming evidence of severe neglect and documented abuse, and considering the deeply established bond of protection and genuine care, the court finds that the child's life is in extreme and immediate danger in the care of Ms. Carla Jensen. Furthermore, the court recognizes the unique life-altering commitment made by Mr. Elias Vance. Emergency temporary custody is terminated and replaced immediately with permanent full guardianship awarded to Mr. Elias Vance. The court directs Child Protective Services to begin adoption proceedings immediately." The gavel slammed down. Thwack! Eli barely registered the sound. He was already kneeling beside Leo, pulling the boy into a fierce, protective embrace. Leo buried his face into Eli's dark suit jacket, his small body trembling, not from cold, but from relief. "We won, Leo," Eli whispered, his voice thick with emotion, his promise to David Sterling finally fulfilled. "We won." The aftermath of the court ruling was a muted explosion of relief. Outside the courthouse, the crisp morning air felt like a benediction. Eli, now legally appointed Leo's guardian, guided the boy and Maverick through the swirling crowd of onlookers. He didn't stop for reporters or for the lingering, hateful glare of Carla Jensen's lawyer. He just focused on the steady, small weight of Leo's hand in his and the rhythmic, grounding presence of the German Shepherd at the boy's side. The fight was won, but the healing had just begun. They drove back to the South Boston apartment, now feeling less like a temporary shelter and more like a fortress. Mrs. Costas was waiting, her face wet with quiet, joyful tears. She hugged Leo fiercely, murmuring blessings in Greek before turning to Eli, her eyes conveying a gratitude too profound for words. "You are a good man, Detective Vance," she whispered, still using the old title, recognizing the enduring duty it implied. "The boy has his shield." The first few weeks of official guardianship settled into a rhythm defined by consistency. Eli, now officially a former detective, threw himself into the practical logistics of fatherhood and the ongoing adoption paperwork. He enrolled Leo in a specialized program at the Perkins School for the Blind near Watertown, a place renowned for its tactile and auditory learning environment. This required a new mode of transportation and a major adjustment to his schedule, but the sight of Leo thriving, his small voice bright with genuine curiosity, was an incomparable reward. Maverick, too, underwent a silent, profound transformation. Now legally recognized as a service animal for Leo, the German Shepherd shed his professional trauma layer by layer. He was no longer a broken canine, but a devoted guide. His posture relaxed, his tail wagged with quiet authority, and his gaze was almost constantly fixed on Leo. The bond between them was seamless. Leo knew the slightest shift in Maverick's weight, the flick of his ear, the subtle pressure of the harness, communicating every obstacle and turn. Maverick's violent protection was the foundation upon which Leo built his courage. Eli began his new career transition. Using his extensive training and network, he opened a small private consulting firm, the Shield Security and Investigation, specializing in cold case analysis and asset protection, operating outside the confines of the bureaucracy that had nearly cost him everything. The decision to embrace the Shield as his brand was a defiant act of reclamation, turning the painful symbol of his failure into a promise of his renewed purpose. The adoption process was swift, expedited by Judge Karras's strong ruling. 6 months after Eli found Leo shivering in the snow, on a glorious, sun-drenched Saturday in late spring, the final hearing took place. It was a private, celebratory affair. Leo, dressed in a crisp blue suit that made him look older and remarkably handsome, stood between Eli and Marcia Dawes. When the new papers were signed and the judge, the same venerable Judge Karras, now smiling, declared Leo Sterling officially Leo Vance, the weight of the past finally lifted. That afternoon, a party was held in Eli's apartment, the furniture pushed back, sunlight streaming in through the open blinds. The room, once a cold bachelor's refuge, was now filled with life. Mrs. Costas had baked a traditional Greek butter cookie cake, and Sergeant Mac Riley attended, looking profoundly uncomfortable in his best civilian attire, but beaming with genuine pride. Eli had one final gift for Leo, one that symbolized the transition from survival to joy. He led Leo by the hand to the corner of the room. "Buddy," Eli said, kneeling down, his voice thick with emotion, "you asked me a long time ago if I was the Shield, and you're right, I am. But you're the one who taught me what it means to keep a promise." He presented Leo with his gift, a new, custom-made white cane. It was crafted from lightweight carbon fiber, featuring a strong cushioned tip. But the most important detail was an engraving near the handle, polished silver, that Eli had spent hours inlaying himself. It read, "Leo Vance, the Shield's Promise." Leo's small fingers traced the raised letters. He didn't speak for a long moment. His face, usually so composed, broke into a wide, unrestrained smile, the first one Eli had ever seen that reached the depth of his soul. He dropped his old plush elephant toy, a symbol he no longer needed, and hugged Eli fiercely. "Thank you, Dad," Leo whispered, the words sounding natural, earned. The chapter closes on a quieter scene weeks later, early on a Saturday evening. Eli is sitting on the steps of his new brownstone apartment in a quieter, tree-lined neighborhood outside the city, a place with a small yard that Maverick adored. Leo is sitting beside him, his new cane resting against the railing, his hand tangled comfortably in Maverick's thick fur. The dog's head rests on Leo's lap. Eli watches the streetlights flicker on, turning the twilight into a wash of soft gold. He runs a hand through Leo's soft, curled hair. The cold, geometric man is gone, replaced by a softer, more grounded father. He looks at the new family he has built, a former cop, a blind boy, and a scarred canine, all of them once broken, now mended by a shared destiny. He didn't get his old life back, but he received something infinitely better, the chance to fulfill a sacred oath and the unconditional love of a son. The Shield wasn't a hero who prevented tragedy. He was the one who stood firm in the aftermath, embracing the broken pieces and rebuilding them with light. It was a testament to the quiet miracles that often unfold when we choose compassion over resignation. And remember that even in the deepest darkness, God sometimes sends an unexpected guide, human or canine, to lead us home. The snow has melted, the court gavel has fallen, and the boy who once shivered alone in the dark has found his light. Elias, the detective who lost his faith, didn't find his old life back, but he found something far more profound: redemption. It's easy to look for miracles in sudden, dazzling flashes of light, but the real miracles are quiet. They are found in the steady, protective rhythm of a German shepherd's paws and the unwavering choice to love a child who needs you. Elias thought he was the one rescuing, but in the end, Leo and Maverick were the unexpected angels sent to restore his own broken faith. This new family, forged in tragedy, is a beautiful testament to God's grace. God doesn't always give us what we lost, but He always sends us what we need. We pray that this story, The Shield's Promise, reminds you that every wound can be mended, and every promise kept is a step closer to grace. The Shield is not a title, it is the courage to stand guard over the innocent. If Leo's courage and Elias's redemption touched your heart, please share this story with someone who needs hope. Comment below and tell us, what does the shield's promise mean to you? And please subscribe to our channel to join our community built on faith and second chances. May God bless you, keep you safe, and guide you to become the shield someone else needs today.